The year was 1851, and the frontier town of Dust Creek wore its scars like an old gunslinger's face, creased, tired, yet stubbornly alive. The sun beat down mercilessly, baking the dirt road until it shimmered. Wooden storefronts sagged from heat and time, shutters creaked in the wind, and horses flicked their tails against flies in the shade of a leaning hitch rail. That afternoon, the town fell into a hush when a lone rider appeared on the horizon. His silhouette swayed in rhythm with his horse, dust rising in little storms around the hooves. By the time he entered the main street, every eye had turned. Men at the saloon's porch leaned against their posts, spitting tobacco into the street. Women pulled their children close and whispered. A few boys, daring in their youth, trailed behind at a distance. The rider was tall, lean, and sun-worn. His black hat shaded a face carved by years of silence and shadow. He carried no smile, only a pair of cold gray eyes that scanned the town without resting. A revolver hung low on his hip, polished from use. Some swore his name was Luke Calder, though none knew for sure. Stories had traveled faster than him. Gunfights in mining towns, a sheriff left dead in Texas, a wagon train defended in New Mexico. Some called him outlaw. Others called him hero. Nobody dared ask which was true. Luke dismounted in front of the saloon. The boards groaned under his boots as he stepped up. His spurs rang sharp in the silence. He pushed through the batwing doors, and the murmur of conversation inside faltered. It was then that she appeared. A little girl, no more than 10, barefoot, with hair the color of wheat straw tied in two rough braids. Her dress was patched at the knees and shoulders, evidence of hard living. She stood in the middle of the street, squinting at him as though he were not some feared wanderer but a curiosity, like a coyote caught in daylight. Luke noticed her when he turned from tying his horse. For a moment, their eyes met, his gray, hers bright and unflinching. He looked away first. Children had no business staring at men like him. But she didn't move. Instead, she marched forward with bold little steps until she was close enough for the town to hear her voice. "I'll marry you someday," she declared. The words cracked the air louder than a gunshot. Men coughed, a woman gasped, and someone laughed nervously. Luke froze where he stood, stunned. He had faced pistols drawn in anger, knives flashing in the dark, but nothing unsettled him like the audacity of a child claiming him in front of the world. He studied her skinny arms, dirt-smudged cheeks, bare toes curling in the dust. No fear in her eyes. None. "Go on home, girl," he muttered, his voice low, gravel dragged across stone. But she shook her head stubbornly. "You heard me. I'll marry you someday." He adjusted his hat, ignoring the stares from porches and windows. He stepped into the saloon without another word, though the echo of her vow lingered in his mind like the taste of iron after blood. Inside, smoke curled above card tables, and a piano clinked weak notes under heavy fingers. Men muttered again, voices returning now that the girl was gone from sight. Luke ordered whiskey, drank it in one swallow, and tried to push away the unease. That night, he learned who she was. Her name was Clara Hale. Her father had died in a mining collapse 2 winters past, leaving her mother to run a small boarding house with little more than grit. Clara carried water for lodgers, scrubbed laundry on the washboard, and delivered bread from the bakery in exchange for coins. She was too young for such work, yet she moved through it with stubborn pride. Folks pitied her, but few lifted a hand to help. Clara, however, didn't want pity. She wanted a future she could hold on to, and when she saw the lone cowboy ride in, hard, unbreakable, untouchable, something inside her latched on. Luke tried to ignore her, yet over the next days, he found her shadowing him, waiting near the blacksmith, perched on the well's stone rim, or sitting cross-legged outside the saloon doors. She peppered him with questions that caught him off guard. "Is it true you shot 5 men at once? Do you ever get lonely? Do you pray, mister?" He rarely answered. When he did, it was short and sharp, though her wide eyes always lingered longer than his words. Against his own instincts, he began to soften, not much, but enough to stop walking past her without a glance. Once, when she skinned her knee, he crouched down, tied a strip of cloth around the wound, and told her to quit running in gravel. She only grinned. That night, he dreamed of a daughter he never had. But Dust Creek was never without trouble. One evening, while Clara fetched water from the pump, a band of drifters staggered into town, men smelling of whiskey, hungry for mischief. By nightfall, they filled the saloon, laughing loud, shoving chairs, challenging locals to cards. The sheriff, an old man whose hands shook on his revolver, did little more than watch. Luke sat in the corner, whiskey untouched. He knew the kind, the sort who pushed until someone broke. Sure enough, one of them spat on the floor near a merchant, then slammed a bottle against the bar. The room tensed. Luke rose, calm as dusk. His boots carried him through the smoke. "Leave it," he said. The drifter sneered. "And who's a skin?" Luke's revolver answered before his lips did. In a flash of silver and thunder, the bottle exploded in shards across the bar. The room froze. Luke's gray eyes burned into man's soul. "I said leave it." The drifters cursed, reached for iron, but too slow. Luke's gun cleared leather 3 more times, each shot deliberate, knocking pistols from hands, splintering wood inches from skin. Chaos erupted, chairs toppling, men diving for cover. When the smoke cleared, 3 drifters lay groaning on the floor, hands bleeding where bullets had torn pistols free. The others stumbled back, faces pale, retreating into the night. Silence pressed against the saloon's walls. From the doorway came a small whisper. "You're not afraid of anything." Clara stood barefoot, her bucket dropped, water spilling across the floorboards. She had watched the whole thing, eyes wide but steady. Blood, smoke, danger, it hadn't chased her away. Instead, she stepped closer, voice carrying with the same stubborn certainty as before. "I'll marry you someday." The crowd laughed nervously again, some shaking their heads, others muttering about foolishness. But Luke didn't laugh. He holstered his revolver slowly, jaw tight. Her words sank deeper than bullets. That night, he sat in his rented room, staring at the coin in his palm. A silver dollar, worn smooth by years of travel. He had carried it since boyhood, a reminder of a father lost to fever and a mother buried in Kansas clay. The coin was all he had left of them, his anchor in a drifting life. At dawn, he placed it on the step of the Hale boarding house. Clara would find it. He fixed the loose hinge on the porch door before mounting his horse. The sun had barely kissed the horizon when he rode out of town. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't dare. From behind him, faint in the still morning air, came a child's voice calling after him. 17 years. I'll find you in 17 years. Luke kept riding. He told himself he'd never return. Yet the sound of her vow chased him across the plains like a shadow he couldn't shake. And as Dust Creek faded behind him, the narrator's voice carried through the rising sun. The frontier kept no promises, but sometimes a child's vow burned brighter than a man's bullet. And once spoken, such words have a way of waiting, outlasting time itself. 17 years later, Dust Creek was no longer the half-forgotten cluster of shacks Luke Calder had once ridden through. The town had grown, stretching wide across the valley, with 2-story brick buildings replacing rotting timber, a new railroad spur running smoke and steel across the horizon, and more saloons than churches. Yet for all its progress, the land still smelled of gunpowder and sweat. Power lay in the hands of whoever could hold it longest. The stagecoach rolled into town just past sundown, its wheels rattling over boards laid across the muddy street. When the door swung open, a woman stepped down, tall, straight-backed, wearing a plain riding dress the color of dusk. She carried no fan, no jewelry, no softness of an Eastern lady, just a leather satchel slung across her shoulder and a gaze that dared the world to move aside. Her hair, chestnut and thick, spilled in a braid over her shoulder, and though her face bore the polish of maturity, the townsfolk who had lived long enough to remember whispered to one another with sharp certainty, "That's her. That's the Hale girl." Clara Hale didn't flinch at the murmurs. She looked at Dust Creek as one might examine an old scar. 17 years had stretched her into a woman forged by hardship, yet every line of her posture carried the stubborn fire of the barefoot girl who had once stood in this very street and declared her vow to a stranger with a gun. She walked straight to the boarding house that had been her mother's. Now it was hers alone. The shutters sagged, the paint peeled, but she had held on to it with iron will, adding land acre by acre until her property stretched into the grazing hills north of town. Clara had become something rare, a woman rancher in her own right, and that she knew was dangerous. By the time the lamps were lit across Dust Creek, word had spread. Clara Hale was back, and so was someone else. Luke Calder had returned. The saloon smelled the same as it had years before. Cheap whiskey, stale tobacco, sweat baked into pine. Luke sat in the farthest corner, hat low, revolver still resting easy on his hip. His hair had silvered at the temples, his face weathered deeper, but his shoulders still carried the weight of a man accustomed to standing alone. He had come back with no announcement, no reason. Some said he was hunting ghosts. Others claimed he was running from them. Clara pushed through the batwing doors as those 17 years had been a mere blink. The room hushed when she crossed the floor, boots striking wood with calm precision. She stopped at his table. Luke lifted his gaze slowly. For a moment, he did not recognize her. Then her voice reached him, steady as a rifle shot. "I told you I'd marry you someday." The room broke into nervous laughter, the same way it had all those years before. But this time there was no barefoot child speaking. This was a woman with fire in her eyes and a steadiness that unsettled him more than the sight of drawn steel. Luke's lips curled into something between a smirk and a wince. Girl's words. Worlds moved on. "So have I," she said evenly. "I didn't come back for dreams, Calder. I came because I need you." The saloon stilled. Men leaned closer. Luke studied her long and hard, searching for jest, for naivety. He found neither. Why? Clara pulled out the empty chair opposite him and sat, uninvited. "There's a man out here who wants my land, calls himself Barrett, cattle baron with a dozen hired guns. He's been leaning on me for months. He burned my barn, scared off half my hands, and told me I'd sign over my deed or he'd salt my fields with my own blood." Luke said nothing, though his jaw tightened. "I've stood my ground, but it's more than I can hold alone. I remember you, Calder. The way you made men scatter with a look. That's why I'm here. I don't need a husband. I need someone who doesn't scare easy." Luke leaned back, shadows cutting lines across his face. "I'm not the man you think. I've spent years running from the trail of my own gun smoke. Blood follows me like dust. You don't want me near you." Clara's eyes burned. "I wouldn't have come if I wanted safety. I came because I want to live without fear. And if Barrett takes my land, I'll have nothing left worth living for." The saloon erupted in sudden noise as Barrett's men themselves strode through the doors, 6 of them in dusters and wide-brimmed hats. Their leader, a thick-set brute with a scar running from ear to chin, spotted Clara immediately. Well, well, the lady rancher come begging to... The men laughed. Luke didn't move, though his hand rested casually near his revolver. Clara stood, her voice strong. "I came for a drink, not for your company." Scarred-face grinned, showing a mouth of yellow teeth. "That land was never meant for a woman. You'll sign before this week's out." He leaned closer, dropping his voice low enough for the room to hear. "Or you'll be buried under your own corral." Luke's chair scraped back, slow, deliberate. He rose, towering over the man. The saloon froze again, history repeating. "You're standing too close," Luke said. Scar laughed. "And who the hell are you?" Luke's revolver was out before the question ended, barrel pressed against the man's chest. Silence swallowed the room. "Name's Calder." Recognition flickered in the outlaw's eyes. Stories had traveled, even to Barrett's men. Scar muttered a curse and backed off, hands raised. "This ain't over." They left in a storm of dust and curses. Clara's heart pounded, though her face betrayed none of it. She looked at Luke, still as quick as they say. He holstered the revolver, jaw tight. "You're stirring up a hornet's nest." "I didn't stir it," she shot back. "Barrett did. I'm just refusing to lie down." Luke walked out of the saloon into the cool night air. Clara followed, catching him at the hitch rail. "You won't help me then?" Luke paused, staring at the lamplight flickering across the street. "I've buried too many." won't be the cause of another grave. Then don't fight for me, Clara said. Her voice softened, but her resolve did not. Fight beside me. He looked at her then, really looked. The little girl who once shadowed him had grown into a woman whose strength matched her vow. Against his will, something stirred inside him, something he thought long dead. Still, he turned his back and walked into the night. But Dust Creek was no place for retreat. The attack came sooner than either expected. That night, Clara returned to her ranch to find fire licking the edges of her barn. Barrett's men had struck. She grabbed her rifle, firing into the air, shouting for them to leave. Shots answered, bullets cutting across her yard. Horses screamed, timber cracked. She fought, crouched behind a water trough, loading and firing until the chamber burned her hands. A bullet whistled past, splintering the post beside her cheek. Another grazed her shoulder, spinning her backward into the dust. And then came a sound she had half prayed for, half feared. The ring of spurs, the thunder of a revolver. Luke Calder charged into the chaos astride his horse, revolver flashing flame. Two of Barrett's men dropped, clutching wounds. The others scattered into the dark, unwilling to test their luck against the legend of Calder. Smoke and embers drifted as Luke dismounted, striding to where Clara pressed her bleeding shoulder. He crouched, tearing his bandana, binding the wound with steady hands. She looked at him, breath ragged, pain biting but pride stronger. Told you. I needed you. His eyes met hers, unreadable. Damn fool woman. You could have been killed. But I wasn't. For the first time in years, Luke almost smiled. They spent the rest of the night dousing flames, salvaging what they could. By dawn, the barn was half a ruin, smoke curling into the pink horizon. Clara leaned against a fence post, exhausted, watching Luke work in silence. When he finally joined her, his shirt soaked with sweat and ash streaking his jaw, she spoke softly. 17 years, Calder. I kept my word. I came back, and I'm a skin again, not as a girl, not as a dreamer, as a woman standing on the edge of losing everything. Fight beside me. He looked at her, the weight of years heavy on his shoulders, the ghosts of every man he had killed pressing down. Yet beneath it all was a glimmer of something he thought long gone. Purpose. The narrator's voice cut through as the morning sun broke across the ranch. Some promises are foolish. Some are forgotten. But some lie in wait, like a spark buried in ash, waiting for the wind. And when that wind comes, even the hardest heart can catch fire. Luke Calder turned his gaze toward the horizon, where Barrett's wrath would surely rise again. He knew then he could not ride away this time. Dawn came to Dust Creek, with a red sky that promised blood. Smoke still curled faintly from Clara Hale's barn, and the air smelled of charred wood and sweat. Luke Calder stood at the edge of her corral, his hat pulled low, watching the horizon as though the hills themselves might rise against them. Clara moved beside him, her shoulder bandaged, her body weary but her spirit unbowed. She had not asked him again to stay. She didn't need to. The silence between them carried the weight of a vow. Word of the attack spread fast. By noon, half the town knew Barrett's men had tried to burn Clara out and failed because Luke Calder rode in with his gun blazing. Men muttered in saloons, some shaking their heads, others smirking at the notion that Barrett would let such defiance stand. The Baron's name carried fear. He owned more cattle than anyone within 50 miles, bought up water rights, paid sheriffs to look the other way. Barrett didn't lose. Luke knew what was coming. Clara knew it too. The fight hadn't been settled, it had only begun. That evening they gathered what help they could. Clara's ranch hands, those who hadn't already fled, stood with her, 3 men rough from years on the range, their loyalty stitched from respect. A few townsfolk came as well, a young blacksmith eager to prove himself, a farmer tired of watching Barrett squeeze his neighbors, a widow who knew her sons would be next if Barrett wasn't stopped. They were no army, but they were willing. Luke taught them quick. He showed them how to brace a rifle, how to load in the dark without spilling powder, how to keep nerves steady when the air thickened with gun smoke. They built barricades from wagons, stacked sandbags near the house, hammered boards across windows. Clara worked beside them, hammer in hand, refusing to rest though her shoulder bled through its bandage. Luke tried to send her inside, but she shook her head. If this is my land, I'll fight for it with my own hands. Night fell, heavy and restless. The men took shifts keeping watch, rifles resting on their knees. Coyotes yipped in the distance, and every sound of wind in the grass felt like the approach of hooves. Clara sat by the fire, staring into the flames, her face drawn with exhaustion, but her eyes alive. Luke sat across from her, cleaning his revolver, the firelight painting hard lines across his features. "You should have kept riding when you had the chance," she said softly. "Maybe." He slid the cylinder back into place. But a man can't outrun himself forever. Their eyes met, and for a moment the silence between them wasn't heavy but warm, charged with something unspoken. Clara broke it with a faint smile. 17 years. I always knew I'd see you again. Luke looked at her long and hard, then returned to his revolver. He said nothing, but the truth was written in the set of his jaw. He had needed to return, even if he hadn't known it himself. The attack came with the sunrise. Hooves thundered down from the ridge, dust rising like a storm cloud. Barrett rode at the head, a broad man with a dark coat and eyes colder than stone. Behind him came 20 men on horseback, rifles and pistols gleaming in the early light. They rode with the confidence of wolves circling prey. Clara's defenders rose to meet them. Rifles braced on fences, pistols drawn, nerves strung taut. Luke stepped into the open, revolver loose at his side, calm as a preacher at prayer. Barrett reined in a few yards off, his horse snorting clouds of steam. "This don't concern you, Calder," Barrett called, his voice like gravel. "Step aside, and I'll let you ride away. I'm here for the woman and the dirt she stands on." Luke spat into the dust. "You'll have to ride through me first." Barrett's laugh was low and cruel. "Then you'll die for nothing?" "I own this valley. Always will." The standoff cracked like a whip. Barrett raised his hand, and his men surged forward. The first volley of gunfire tore the morning open. Clara's defenders answered, bullets striking dirt, tearing through saddle leather. Horses screamed. Men shouted, the air filled with acrid smoke. Luke moved like a shadow through chaos, his revolver barking fire, each shot deliberate. A rider lunged for him with a rifle, but Luke's bullet took him square in the chest, knocking him backward into the dust. Clara fired from behind the barricade, her aim steady despite her wound. She struck a man from his horse, then another who tried to flank from the side. Her hands shook, but her eyes never wavered. She had promised herself she would not break. Barrett's men pushed hard, circling, trying to burn them out. One threw a torch onto the roof of the ranch house, flames licking high. Clara ran toward it without thought, grabbing a bucket, dousing the fire under a hail of bullets. A shot clipped the ground near her feet, but Luke was there in an instant, cutting down the gunman with a single shot. "You're a damn fool," he growled, pulling her back behind cover. "And you're still alive because I won't lie down," she snapped, breathless but fierce. The fight raged for what felt like hours, though it was only minutes. Men fell on both sides. The blacksmith took a bullet in the leg, the farmer dropped with a wound to the arm, but they kept firing. Clara's defenders held the line, grit and desperation giving them strength. Barrett grew furious. He drove his horse straight through the smoke, pistol in each hand, firing wild. Luke met him head-on. The two men circled, bullets flying, hooves tearing the earth. Luke's revolver clicked empty, and Barrett's shot grazed his side, blood darkening his shirt. Luke staggered but held firm, drawing his knife. Barrett leapt from his horse, tackling him into the dirt. They rolled, fists flying, the knife glinting between them. Barrett's weight pressed down, his teeth bared. "You can't stop me, Calder. This land's mine." Luke snarled, shoving back, with every ounce of strength left in him. But the knife turned, pressing dangerously close, and then Clara's rifle cracked. Barrett froze, eyes wide, a bloom of red spreading across his chest. He staggered back, mouth open in shock, before collapsing into the dust. His men saw their master fall, and panic rippled through them. Some fled, Others dropped their guns and raised their hands. Within minutes, the field was quiet save for the groans of the wounded and the crackle of dying fire. Luke lay on his back, chest heaving, blood soaking his shirt. Clara dropped to her knees beside him, hands shaking as she pressed against his wound. "Stay with me," she whispered fiercely. "Don't you dare leave now." His eyes flickered, gray as storm clouds. "Thought I told you not to make promises." "And I told you," she said, tears streaking through the grime on her cheeks. "I keep them." The defenders gathered, binding wounds, dragging the dead aside. The battle was over. Barrett's reign of fear had ended. Dust Creek would breathe easier now, though at a cost written in blood across Clara's yard. Luke drifted in and out of consciousness as they carried him inside, Clara never leaving his side. She tended him for days, grinding herbs, boiling water, pressing cloths to his fevered brow. Through it all she refused to let despair take her. When at last his eyes opened clear, she was there, hair loose, face pale from sleepless nights. He tried to speak, but she laid a hand against his lips. "You don't owe me words. Just stay." He stared at her long, then closed his eyes, letting the weight of years slip away. The town spoke of it for weeks. The day Clara Hale stood her ground, the day Luke Calder fought not as an outlaw, but as a man defending something greater than himself. They whispered that perhaps even the hardest gunslinger could change, that even the loneliest cowboy could find a reason to stop riding. When Luke was strong enough to stand, he joined Clara outside. The land stretched wide, scarred but still theirs. She leaned against the fence, arms folded, eyes on the horizon. "You'll ride on again?" she asked quietly. He shook his head. "Not this time." For the first time, she allowed herself to smile, without restraint. The narrator's voice rose as the wind moved across the grass, carrying the smell of smoke and earth. A little girl, once promised to marry a cowboy, 17 years later, she returned. Not with dreams of fairy tales, but with the strength of a woman who would not bend. The frontier tested many things: courage, loyalty, love, and in Dust Creek it proved this. Sometimes the only bullet strong enough to outlast the years is a promise kept. The sun sank low, painting the valley in fire and gold. Clara and Luke stood side by side, silent, unyielding, no longer alone. Under the wide, star-scorched sky, the town of Dust Creek lay hushed, its lamps guttering low as though the whole settlement held its breath. The air was taut, heavy with the kind of silence that comes only before a storm. Caleb stood in the middle of the street, boots planted firm, Colt resting easy at his side, though his heart beat harder than any man would have guessed. He was no boy anymore, no drifting hand who took odd jobs and kept his head low. Tonight he was something else. Tonight he was a man who either claimed his place or left it in blood. Eliza watched from the boardwalk outside the saloon, her dark dress catching the faint glow of lantern light. She had changed from the girl who once ran barefoot with a wild promise on her lips. Time had tested her, but she stood tall, chin lifted, eyes sharp, the weight of 17 lost years and all their truths carried squarely on her shoulders. She'd come back not just to find him, but to stand beside him when the time came. That time was now. On the far end of the street, shadows stirred. Men emerged from the dark, guns strapped, hats low. Rourke was at their head, his broad shoulders cutting a figure Caleb had long dreaded. The outlaw was older now, scar carved deep across his cheek, but he still carried the same cold air. The look of a man who thought the world belonged to him if he was only mean enough to take it. Dust Creek had been to him once. Caleb knew Rourke meant to see it bend again. "You should have left when you had the chance, boy," Rourke called, voice rasping down the street. "This ain't your fight." Caleb's jaw worked. He thought of the girl who had once tugged at his sleeve, declaring she'd marry him someday. He thought of her return, the fire in her eyes, and the way the town seemed to breathe again when she set foot on its soil. This was his fight and more. "I ain't leaving," Caleb said. His voice carried clear, unshaken. "Not tonight. Not ever again." The men chuckled low, hands brushing against holsters. Rourke didn't laugh. His gaze shifted toward Eliza, studying her like a hawk sighting prey. Ah, he muttered, almost amused. The girl. The one who thinks she's come back to save this town. You should have stayed gone. You don't know how deep the dirt runs here. Eliza stepped forward, unflinching. I know enough. And I know men like you don't stop until someone makes them. Her words cut the silence, sharp as a blade. Caleb's chest tightened, torn between pride and fear. If Rourke chose, she'd be the first one his gun found. Caleb's finger twitched near his Colt. The night stretched thinner, brittle as glass. Every soul still in Dust Creek peered from behind shutters, praying yet unable to turn away. Then came the sound, metal sliding clean. Rourke's hand flicked down. A flash of steel in the lantern glow. His pistol cleared leather. Caleb moved. The world exploded into thunder and fire. His Colt barked once, twice, quick as thought. Sparks lit the street. Rourke's men scattered, returning fire. Bullets screamed against wood and glass, shattering Dust Creek awake. Horses shrieked from their ties, rearing against the sudden chaos. Down! Caleb roared, pushing Eliza back against the saloon wall, just as a round split the post where her head had been. She didn't cower. Her hand went for the rifle leaning just inside the doorway, and when she swung it up, her aim was steady as any man's. One outlaw dropped with a cry, clutching his shoulder. Caleb fired again, teeth gritted, ears ringing with each blast. He'd never been in a fight this close, this hot. No practice round out of 10 had ever taught him how sweat burned in your eyes or how your stomach knotted when death spit fire your way. Still, his hand was sure. Every pull of the trigger was an answer to all the years he'd run, all the nights he'd wondered if he'd ever stand tall. Rourke advanced through the smoke, undeterred, a devil striding with gun blazing. Caleb ducked into the dirt, rolled, came up firing. His round clipped Rourke's hat clean off, but the man laughed, a hard, joyless sound that carried over the fight. You think you're made for this? Rourke bellowed. You're just a boy clinging to a woman's words. The insult landed hot. Caleb's chest heaved. Eliza's promise from long ago echoed in his skull, as sharp now as the day she'd spoken it. He rose from cover, rage and resolve fused tight. I ain't a boy, he said, voice breaking through the din, and I ain't alone. Another volley erupted. Dust and splinters filled the air. Through it all, Eliza stayed by his side, her rifle cracking in rhythm with his Colt. The pair fought as though 17 years had been nothing but a pause between breaths. Townsfolk, stirred by the sight, began slipping out from their hiding places, some with hunting rifles, some with axes or shovels. They had cowered long enough. Tonight, Dust Creek stood. Rourke saw it too late. His men faltered as the tide shifted, their numbers thinning under the sudden storm of resistance. For the first time, his sneer slipped. You'll regret this, he growled, ducking behind a trough. His eyes locked on Caleb. One of us is dying tonight. Caleb knew he was right. The gunfire dimmed as both sides caught breath. All that remained was the weight between them. Years of fear and silence pressed into this one moment. Slowly, Caleb stepped into the street, Colt still warm in his hand. Dust swirled around his boots. The night smelled of smoke and iron. His whole body hummed. But his aim was steady, heart guided by something stronger than fear. Rourke rose to meet him, pistol raised. Their eyes locked. Time stilled. Then 2 shots. The world cracked open. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Rourke staggered, eyes wide, hand clutching his chest. He dropped hard into the dust, gun clattering from his grip. His breath rattled once, twice, then stopped. Silence claimed the street. Caleb stood, unmoving, Colt lowered at his side. His chest rose and fell like a man come through a storm. Around him, the town exhaled. Men dropped their arms. Women stepped from doorways, clutching children close. The nightmare that had shadowed Dust Creek for years lay broken in the dirt. Eliza crossed to him, eyes bright even through the soot and fear. She placed her hand on his arm, steadying him when his knees threatened to buckle. For all his strength, he realized he might have fallen if not for her touch. You did it, she whispered. He shook his head, voice rough. We did. Her smile flickered, soft, weary. full of the years that lay behind them and the promise that still lingered between. The sheriff, old and gray, but unbowed, finally stepped forward. His hat was in his hands. "Dust Creek owes you more than we can ever pay. You broke the chain tonight." Caleb looked around, seeing the faces that had once turned from him, now watching with something close to hope. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man who'd barely hung on, who'd nearly lost everything if not for the girl, no, the woman who'd come back to him. Eliza's grip on his arm tightened, as if she read the storm behind his eyes. "You stood when it counted," she said. "That's all anyone could do." The night slowly gave way to quiet. Folks began tending to the wounded, gathering the dead, setting right what the fight had torn apart. But through it all, Caleb and Eliza remained at the center of the street, bound not by chance but by choice. As dawn bled pink across the horizon, Caleb felt the weight shift inside him. He wasn't the lone cowboy anymore, the drifter chasing shadows. He had stood, fought, and lived. He had a place now, not just in Dust Creek, but beside her. Eliza turned to him as the sun crowned the hills. Her face, lined with exhaustion, glowed with something deeper. "Do you remember," she asked softly, "what I told you when I was a child?" He swallowed, throat tight. "You said you'd marry me someday." Her smile warmed like the morning light. "Someday's a long time coming, Caleb." He searched her eyes, the years falling away, until all that remained was the promise that had carried them both across so much loss and fear. And for the first time in his life, he believed in tomorrow.